How do we plan a lesson as ski and snowboard instructors? Do you come up with a detailed plan before you start the lesson? Or do you just kind of fire from the hip and make it up as you go? How can we strike a balance between the benefits of a more structured and well-planned lesson with the flexibility of taking a more student-centered approach allows towards making adjustments on the fly? In this episode, Pete Novom explains his thoughts on the matter, providing tools and ideas on how to use existing formulas and make them more adaptable to the changing needs of our students. Besides being a great friend of mine, and one of the primary reasons I call Okemo home, Pete is a member of the PSIA-AASI National Team and one of the most well-respected members of the PSI Eastern Region's education staff. I hope you enjoy this episode of Okemo Tech Talks.
So the point of this is I spent a lot of time thinking about how to structure a lesson, how to plan a lesson, what to plan, and I wanted to share some of my insights for y'all. The caveat here being like, there's no right or wrong way to do this. We've got some norms, and I'm going to share my take on some of those norms and some other pieces moving forward. So this is what we're doing tonight. We'll talk a little bit about teaching formulas, a little bit about what memorable teaching is. We're going to touch on the relevance gap, which is a cool concept that we've been working on at PSIA. When I say we, I mean the previous team. Talk a little bit about when to plan, talk a little bit about teaching versus learning, and I'm going to share a prioritization tool, and then you guys are going to learn from my lived experiences. Lucky you. All right. So I'm just going to kick this off by saying we've all seen this before, right? All right. Well, there's nothing wrong with this, right? It's a formula. It has a beginning, a start, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's well laid out and it's well crafted. It's a winning formula. Okay. You can steal it, you can share it, and it works pretty great for everything that we need. Like, the challenge with formulas is that people like to plan everything. Okay. They like to take the entire 4 steps and they like to show up to an exam or to a lesson and they have the whole thing worked out. The problem is it doesn't allow you necessarily the freedom as an instructor to really go where you need to go to create awesome connections with your students. Okay. So here's another formula. Okay. And I've made a video about this. Like, I believe in this formula: static, simple, complex, whole. So the first formula allows you to to make sure you don't miss steps. You introduce yourself, you make a rough plan for the lesson, you do some, you go on an adventure for a little while, you summarize it. Okay, great. This formula allows you to pick so that was about the entire lesson. This formula is about like one little tiny point you want to get across, and it allows you to take it from a small point into an entire progression, and you can make your point sort of relevant and useful, and hopefully they walk away understanding how to plug it into something. But again, it's a formula, okay? And it's a framework, okay? But it doesn't, just because you use the formula doesn't mean that it actually sets you up for success. So what you do with the formula matters. So here's a question for y'all. And drop your answers in the chat. But one of the cool things about being part of Vail Resorts is that everyone primarily had the same focus for their fall training, for their welcome back, their indoor, their on snow. That we had a couple of things that we were told every resort did. Does anyone actually remember what that was?
Sorry, my thing went on mute. Patrick says safety, fun, and learning.
Cool. Nope. Did anyone remember? Okay. The short answer is I'm not shocked. Okay. And if you're struggling to remember, that's because what you attended honestly was a presentation. It wasn't like it wasn't a lesson. It was a presentation that we wanted to tell you exactly what we wanted so that you could survive the season. It was a very simple style of learning could occur, and it was a simple style, but it was a presentation, not teaching. So a presentation is information flows one way, okay? And they're based on the assumption that people will trust you. Okay. It's more of a data dump. It's based on my motivations, okay, as a teacher, not really your motivations as a learner. Okay. So like, yeah, that information, by the way, was the professional trio. Okay. If anyone remembers. And it was 3 components to it, and bonus points if anyone can remember that by the end of this. Okay. So it was really all about me as the presenter or the educator, and not really about y'all as the learner. Okay. So to me, teaching is a lot more collaborative. Okay. Trust can occur. I'm not saying it will, right? You can technically do all the right things and trust still doesn't occur. It's experience-based, okay? And so full disclosure, what we're doing right now is a presentation, right? It's pretty hard to be interactive in this kind of environment. Not impossible, but difficult. And it's based on the students' motivations, okay? So can anyone share a moment where they had some memorable learning opportunities, like as a participant? And if you just drop it in the chat, if you could think of an example and why it was memorable. And if y'all can't come up with something, I would. Any students, aha moment. Okay. So to me, the most memorable moments in learning were when people build a connection with you. So like when Brandon identified my stance. Nice work, Rich. So to me, I'm going to just tell you a quick story. 2009, I went down to New Zealand, and it was my first season. I was really excited, and they put me in the new hire training, right? I'm like a strong level 2, halfway through my level 3 process. And I'm kind of like, oh man, I'm going back to new hire training. Okay. And so what was really fascinating was watching how that trainer dealt with that. Okay. So he looked at this group. We're at the Remarkables. We have some of the steepest terrain in the southern Alps of New Zealand, and they hold a free ride world tour event there. And it was like, this happened to be like the best opening day of the season. And so that trainer looked at us and goes, you want to go ski the chutes? And I'm like, okay. Happened to be one of the managers. So I think he felt like he could get away with something. So he takes us up to the chutes. He does double pull plants down a 45 to 50 degree pitch. It was the best thing I've ever seen. And we all were suddenly whooping and hollering. And then he took us straight to the magic carpet. And I think what he did there is he took a look at our motivations and built a connection with us, because he knew, he's like, we need to spend some time together. We need to get some yahoos out. These people are pros, and they're about to go do a bunch of stuff that they more or less don't want to do. And I never forget that, because he totally changed my expectation of what you can do. I saw some nodding. I saw some smiles, right? So you probably all have memorable teaching stories that start with something like that. They built a strong connection, and they were able to do that through adapting their behavior a little bit to you. Okay. So I want to introduce you to something real quick. And so this is a concept. I've stolen a chunk of a presentation from Interski, that there's now a decision-making task force. They're working on a bunch of different content, but they presented this concept, and I want to share a little bit with y'all. But basically, I want to introduce you to the relevance gap. So the relevance gap is pretty simple, right? You've got you see this graph on the left, you've got student needs, and you've got the lesson experience, right? And in this first version of the relevance gap, you'll notice that those two lines are very, very different. In fact, that red line just goes straight no matter what this blue line's doing, right? So that red line right there is doing whatever the instructor is doing, and it's just going and it's going. They made a plan. This little dot right here was their plan. Okay. They didn't deviate. They didn't change, and they just went this way. Now it's somewhat adjacent to that line. So they may feel like they did a good lesson, and they really met the needs of the student. Okay. So look at this line. What this is that decision moment. We're going to call it orienting. Is they just continually oriented, and their decisions, their activities, the moments in time that they had, they tried to bring them closer to what the experience and behavior of the student was, okay? And so the net result is that these two lines are roughly parallel, okay? And it's such a simple concept, but the idea is that at the end of the day, we want the smallest relevance gap between what they need and what I'm trying to do. And that is one of the seeds to a successful lesson. So now for the fun part, spinny wheel. So this relevance gap and the decision-making process come down to this basically orient, decide, act, observe, okay? And the trick is you got to keep doing it a lot, right? You can't just do it once, right? So there's, as we know from our Vail Resorts decision-making video, there are 10,000 decisions we make in a day, right? So most in that instance, they're talking about safety. In this instance, we're talking about how can we close that gap, okay? And so I think what I find really interesting about this, I know, graphics. So we focus a lot on instructor skills, okay? In our world, in training, in PSIA, right? And I think like what you know is less important than what you do with what you know, right? So you don't get relevance unless you have a good decision-making process. So we're going to put that in the back burner, and I think we might have the ability to come back to that in the future in another webinar, but I just wanted to introduce y'all to the relevance gap for a second, okay? So my next question is, has anyone had a lesson where they went, cool, I did everything great, but, right? I know I have. I know, I'm certain we all have, right? And like, again, if you want to add to the conversation, feel free to drop something into the chat. Brandon, you can always chime in with some of the comments. But to me, I feel like my lessons were meh, and if the product suffered when things are getting formulaic, right? I've had, back in the heyday of my ski instructor career at Okemo, before I moved into management a bit more, we had a moment in time where you could do a 1 hour lesson. And I think I did a bunch of days with 7 1 hour lessons in a row. And you get to the end of it, and by the, if you're doing it, if you're not conscious about what you're doing, you end up kind of doing the same thing. Oh, well, that worked, I'll try this with this student. Well, that worked, I'll try this with this student. And it's kind of do the same thing over and over again. And I'm not sure it's relevant. And I don't know that I built the connection that I really, truly wanted with the student, okay? What it's coming down to is like, formulas are good. They are. They're helpful. New hires need them. We can take a formula. We can say, do step 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll get somewhere useful, okay? But to me, it's about what portions of the formula do you plan, and what portions of the formula do you leave for a little bit of in the moment deviation or adaptation, so to speak. Okay, so to me, I always plan the play. All right, so the play is a way to get started. You make a couple of quick assumptions, right? Like, all right, I've got a bunch of level 1 or 2 sort of never evers. I'm gonna just come up with a game, like some sort of skating race, whether it's 1 foot or 2 foot, to try and get them moving on the equipment. Okay, I don't plan the drill in the same sense, because to me, the drill is, the goal of that is to take something that I learned. So I took a little temperature of what the group needs, and then the drill is based on what they do or don't do in the play. Okay, and then so the play is based on an assumption of the skill or outcome, right? The drill is based on how that outcome went and how high their level of success is during the play. Okay. And then the adventure, I'm going to take something that they want that's take something that they did in the drill, and I'm going to take it on the road, go on an adventure, and try and push it as far as I can go so that real learning can occur. All right. So, you're probably thinking this is experiential learning or experience-based learning. And I would say, yeah, it is. We find that learning can occur at a much higher, a stronger and higher rate if they experience it for themselves. If I explain it to them, it doesn't always stick. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Okay, repeat the cycle. Cool. So I think what's really important is being ready to pivot. Now, I love Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if y'all can read this, but I put a few Calvin and Hobbes quotes in here. Last minute panic is my jam. So in order to be ready to pivot, okay, you need to be able to, you need to have enough of a framework of where you can go in any given moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a tool with you that I made. And at the end of this, hopefully y'all gave your emails to Brandon or you filled out the sheet. I will send out this tool to anyone that wants it. I'll also drop it in the chat at the end. But basically, I can tell you that I've had some pretty good success with this, and I'll just show you what I mean. So all it is, and I'll show you, is there's 5 columns because there are, sorry, snowboarders, in this instance, this is a ski-based tool, but you could add one more twist-based fundamental, right? So it's a list of fundamentals on the top, and it's a list of outcomes on the bottom. Now, the outcomes are things that came off the top of my head that I think that can be modified with this fundamental. These are pretty universal, right? So something like controlling the center of mass to the relationship of the center mass to base support, and then reduce muscle fatigue, and then move pressure along the ski, right? So what the goal here is to take an activity that you use every day and try and find a primary, put it in a column, okay? Something like this. So hopping, right? Hopping primarily, just jumping up and down, is going to affect the relationship of the center mass to the base of support. Now, this is a little subjective. You could, before y'all get mad at me, I could put it in this column as well. In fact, I probably will. How about that? The idea here, is that you're trying to create a neural pathway between decision-making and activities or outcomes, okay? And it can't just be one, right? Because you don't do an activity for the sake of an activity. You do an activity for the sake of an outcome. Or if you want an outcome, but you can't think of an activity, this will help. And if you fill this column and you get to an exam, your brain is going to have all these connections and ways of using a bunch of different exercises. And I can tell you personally, I've known at least 2 examiners that have done this kind of a process with me, and we sat down and we filled it out, and we came to the conclusion, we all walked away, me included, with a stronger understanding of how to connect activities to more than one fundamental and to specific outcomes, okay? So the point being is that's just one way of doing this, okay? You can go to training, you can read books, but you do need a bank of knowledge, and you need a way of organizing your thoughts, because in the East anyway, a level 2 exam, you have 20 minutes to do something effective with your time, and they really want you to adapt something to the changing needs of the learner, okay? So you have to be ready to pivot on the drop of a hat, okay? We'll come back to that in a sec, but another piece of this puzzle of like how to structure the lesson is that if I don't plan everything, what's the fear? Okay, the fear is that they might struggle. And I think new instructors fall into this trap all the time where they think, I have to give them all the answers right away. But I can say that I'm calling this teaching versus learning because I can stand there and I can present information and I can tick boxes on my teaching progressions, okay? And it doesn't mean that learning is occurring. I could tell someone, this is the physics behind a wedge turn, but that doesn't mean they understand it, okay? But if I give them an activity like, a smiley face, draw a smiley face with their foot, and then I have them try the smiley face with their foot, and then I have them try it while they're sliding, and I let them experience that is how, and I don't tell them necessarily that learning is going to occur, turning is going to occur because of that. There's an opportunity where learning occurs based on the activity. And this is my favorite way to introduce stuff because there's such a strong connection to that moment in time, that aha, okay? A little just side note, my personal rule of thumb when I'm planning a lesson is I want to 80% do stuff, 20% active teaching, right? 20, and you might say 20% talking. Now, those of you that know me well are going to go, well, that's bollocks, Pete. You talk all the time. You present information all the time. But I don't actually do it always for the reason of changing understanding or actually teaching. I do it because we need something to talk about to build trust, right? And sometimes you gain credibility, through doing things. Sometimes you gain credibility for having knowledge. But if you have a good conversation going, regardless, it's the actual activities that I pick that I expect the meat of the learning to occur from. Okay. The other thing is that scientifically, doing things can have a higher impact. So I don't need to go into the science of it, but there's this stuff in your brain that when you struggle, it builds up a stronger neural pathway. It's effectively, there's like a chemical name for it. I'm going to mispronounce it. So I'm not going to go down that road. But number one, if you struggle a little bit and then you learn, the neural pathways are stronger. Number two, you happen to have fun. Okay. There's a proven link between humor, fun, and retention of information. In fact, if humor is occurring, and I using humor because I know it's been studied, it's like a 65% increased chance of retention of information. Okay.
I was gonna say really quick to add to your point, Pete, there was actually a study that basically suggested that essentially that a student will progress in terms of motor skills and learning when you put them in a zone where it's basically about they're working at about 105% of their ability level, right? So just beyond what they're capable of doing normally is kind of like that optimal zone for learning, right? We don't want to push them too far past what they're capable of. We don't want to keep them too comfortable. But just the idea, I don't know how you quantify 105% of someone's ability, but like just the idea of just being just slightly beyond what their maximum capacity is tends to be where the most learning and development occurs.
Cool. So I stopped sharing my screen because I just want to run you through something. So far, this has been a presentation, right? Okay. So I didn't plan this part this morning, but on the drive from my house to here, which takes about a minute and a half, after I put the kids in the bath and ran out the door, don't worry, my wife's going to make sure they don't drown. I thought, okay, I better do something, right? Because I need to demonstrate what I'm talking about. We can't go skiing, so I'd love to show you a skiing example, but instead I'm going to show you a chef example. And the reason I'm going to show you a chef example was because I did that for a long time. And it's a very relatable thing. But if you have the opportunity to show your screen, please do. Because I'd love to just watch you try this and maybe have some people raise their hands. But basically, a lot of you may know this, but there's like a kind of hack to understanding how to cook steak. Okay. So, yeah, exactly. Nice work, Chris. But what I like about this is that I don't know exactly where we're going to go with this just yet, but raise your hand if you like steak, medium rare. Raise your hand if you like steak. Good point. Okay. Raise your hand if you like steak rare. Should have started with that. Raise your hand if you like steak medium. Or drop it in the chat if you don't want to. Okay. Raise your hand if you like steak well done. My teeth aren't good enough for well done steak, so I go on the rarer side. But basically, take your hand, go like this. Everyone wave your fingers like this. So just take your thumb and touch it to the pointer finger. Okay, so this is, if you point the fleshy part of your hand, it's pretty soft, right? Do you know where I'm going with this? That's what rare to medium rare steak feels like. Okay, now touch this one right here, the next finger. Okay, see how this muscle gets a little denser? Okay, there's your medium rare to medium. Okay, this is your medium well, and this is your well. Now, I don't understand when anyone wants meat like that. I'm really sorry. I'm supposed to be inclusive and welcoming, but this feels like a hockey puck. I'm sorry. I'll be better, I promise. Okay, so go back. Well, okay. So what I like about this is that like there's a real takeaway, okay? And there's an opportunity to pivot, okay? And so like we could then focus, if I was actually teaching you how to cook a steak, I could just focus on like the one we want and the one on either side, right? Now, realistically, the only reason you need this is if your thermometer is broken. But on the fly, in a kitchen, it's good to know texturally, roughly what a steak feels like. Because if you've got 12 steaks on the grill, you can go around and you can basically just do this and be like, all right, those 3 are medium, those 2 are medium, and you kind of know. And if you just totally relax their hand, okay, without anything, that's a black and blue. You ever have a black and blue? Basically, it's a raw piece of meat that's still cold on the inside, but like maybe someone breathed fire on it once, and people from Philly like that. So there's a few different ways to pivot in this environment. There's a few different ways to make things real. But I wanted I was thinking about this. I was like, how do I show learning by doing on a little bit of adaptation to the learner? Because everyone now knows what texture their steak is supposed to be, correct? Roughly? Okay, cool. So pivots have a whole range. Adaptation has a whole range to the changing needs of the learner. And that reorienting piece of the decision-making process. Now, I have taught a lesson before, a ski lesson with no skiing, because that's what the learner wanted. All right. So story number 2, this one's a skiing story. I don't know that this is going to be your ski school director's favorite story, but basically I had a lady who just wanted her husband to share the illusion with her that they all went on a ski trip. So we basically had I was working in Niseko at this ski resort called Niseko Village. And basically there was a tiny double chair, and at the bottom was the Hilton Hotel, and at the top was the Green Leaf, and that had they both had restaurants. So every morning for like a week, we'd meet her husband and her at the bottom of the double chair, okay? And she would wave bye to her husband, and he would say, "Have a fun day at skiing, honey." And she'd be like, "Yep, I'm gonna go skiing." We'd get on the chair, we'd go to the top of the double, and then we'd make a left into the next hotel. We'd spend about an hour drinking coffee, talking about life and whatever. And I would ask her about every 10 minutes, like, do you want to go skiing? No pressure. Okay, great. So lunchtime would hit, and we'd basically ski back down, and she'd switch from coffee to beer or wine. And I'd sit there and I'd entertain her, and we'd talk about whatever she wanted. And every day, I tried to convince her to ski more, but the reason I found this to be a little bit of a win is that every day I got her to do more than one more run. Okay. So the first day was literally up, down. Second day was up, down. And I was like, well, why don't we go get a coffee at the second, back at the other one, like an afternoon coffee to help with some of the wine from lunch. Okay. And then the third day we skied to about another 100 yards to another bar. And we hung out there for a little bit. And by the end of the day, we'd done 4 runs by the end of the week. So, I felt like it was a win because I got her to push herself a little bit. She felt like it was a win because she maintained the illusion. And if my normal expectations and my normal plan for that lesson was, if I tried to stick to it, we both would have ended up unhappy. Now, again, that's an extreme version of adapting your lesson to the changing needs of the learner, but I think it illustrates his point pretty well. In an exam, all right, adaptation, collaboration, and experimentation and play are built into the actual scoring nature of the exam. There are scores for all of these pieces, right? I trimmed it a little bit so you don't see the whole thing, but these are all things that get scored, okay? And the fastest way for us to know that you nailed your teach segment is if we can see a visible change in plan, okay? That's not the only way to pass, right? You can pass because you could adapt and we don't know, right? You could make a change to manage the physical risk. You could experiment on something. It just seems like you're sticking with your original plan. But one of the things that I've noticed as a selector for dev team tryouts and as an examiner for level 2s and 3s is that the people that it's pretty obvious that they are changing their plan partway through to clearly adapt. And it's usually because it's not going the way they thought, right? And those people score a much higher score. And also learning actually occurs, right? You don't have to actually improve your group in a level 2 or 3 exam to pass, right? The intent to improve them needs to be there, but in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you might not, right? But the ones that actually did create learning adapted. They hit the adventure portion and they changed something, okay? So I just want to come back to this slide a little bit, all right? So yes, it's a formula. Yes, it's a useful formula. But as long as you know where to put your energy into and where to leave some wiggle room, then you can have a much more successful lesson, okay? So this is kind of my way of breaking this down. Play, plan, okay? Drill is where you modify and explore. Adventure is where you do something, okay? And adventure is probably where they're going to experience the most, because in the drill, they might experience something in an isolated environment once or twice. But the adventure is where they do something over and over again and they get the repetition and you keep coming back to the thing you were working on during the drill and you discovered during the play, okay? And, you know, as long as you keep reorienting, spinny wheel, and making decisions that bring you back to what you discover along the way, you're going to tailor that to the needs of the student and you're going to build trust, okay? So to keep it really simple, this is a good model. And it's not what you know, but how you use it and how you interpret it. And that is sort of my decision-making process and my rough plan, pun intended, going into a teaching segment, whether it be I'm out coaching you guys, or, you know, in a tryout environment where it's a little bit more structured. So Barb said, she loves the statement of it's not what you know, but what you do with what you know. I also think it's freeing to know that you can, if you have a chance to keep reorienting, then if you screw up, it doesn't matter. Because you just reorient and get back on track, all right? And I think sometimes in an exam or a tryout environment especially, as soon as people make a mistake, they say something that they didn't intend to, or it's less relevant, there's a reaction from the group, they think it's over, okay? I personally have done that. When I made ETS, I said I was going to teach hop turns, and then I went and I did the worst hop turns of my life. Like, they were shocking. And I walked back up the hill and I went, let's do that again. That was terrible, wasn't it? And it actually was great because it lowered the stress level of the group. They could see that I was just trying to, you know, have a good time in a weird environment. And I reoriented, and I think I did a better job because I had that opportunity to slow down and reorient. Brandon?
I was gonna say, like, I think the highlight of that example, right, is that you earned a bit of trust and connection with your students. And to me, that can often be way more of an important element than what you teach. Because if you create that trust and connection with a group of students, they might come back for more just based on that, you know, irregardless of what you actually taught them. But you could also have the best lesson plan in the world. And if you lack that trust and connection, they may not, at worst, get anything from it. And they probably won't be back if they don't trust you in that environment. And if you're setting off on one plan and sticking to it come hell or high water, no matter if the students are struggling or if they're, you know, maybe are or not getting anything from it, right, you're going to lose that trust and connection. Whereas if you keep making decisions and adjusting your plan, right, that's apparent.
Elle said, adapting to the changing needs of the learner does not have to be scary or a drastic thing. Change the radius, change the snow surface, steepness of the run, etc. Absolutely. So, Scott, do you want to elaborate on what you just said?
Depth of drill application allows for more effective pivots. So taking time to actually fill out the spreadsheet that you provided will allow us to pivot more effectively. You know, if we see the class going and needing one particular technique or focus or, you know, whatever the class needs, to be able to have a number of drills to be able to support that provides greater confidence and effective application. That's my expansion. So there's an invitation for the instructor to continue learning. Learn, learn, learn.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Scott. Dave.
Yeah, to kind of follow on from that, I really like that spreadsheet you had, Pete, and something I say to myself a lot when I teach is if this, then that. And that's kind of where your spreadsheet comes in a little bit. You know, you see something in a student, they lack one of those fundamental skills, and then that leads you to that spreadsheet to pick an activity that is hopefully going to improve that skill, leading to that outcome. And another thing I wanted to add real quick was planning a lesson. Like, I very rarely plan a lesson. I very rarely stand at lineup and think, okay, this is my plan for this lesson. And I think that's where we have to draw the line between instructors and coaches. I'm sure everybody sees those instructors at their mountain that they watch them teach and they have their same 3 or 4 canned progressions and they just instruct to what they know and they don't really change or adapt and meet the needs of the learner. Whereas some of the best coaches just coach what's out there in front of them, right? And they don't have a plan. They see what they're working with. They build that trust and that relationship within the first couple of minutes. And the planning happens kind of on the fly. And we all know we don't have very long to build that trust and those relationships. It might be a lift ride. If you're not even on a lift yet, it's just a couple of conversations. But how many people lead into a lesson with some variation of, why did you take a lesson today? What do you want to do today? What do you want to get out of today? And I think with most students, but maybe not small young kids that probably don't have an answer to that question, most students will be able to tell you about what they want to get out of the lesson, what they want to do. Kids, it might just be going out having fun. People might want to come for a really technical lesson. So asking that question to begin with then leads you into all the other stuff we just talked about.
And that's Dave, our presenter in what month?
2
Brandon?
months.
2 months? I said what, not one.
October 29th, to be specific.
So Jen is making a statement from the teaching task force, which I find is really cool. So thank you for that. We, ultimately, the teaching task force, made this a clear and obvious element because it's one of the most observable differences between presenting and facilitating learning. Thank you for that. Thank you, Jen. And if you've got a bunch of different motivations, right? And I know this was a really simple presentation, but what I'm hoping is we've got a variety of people on this call, from newer instructors to ed staff members, trainers, etc. So if you're a new instructor, hopefully this was just a way to warm your brain up to think about what to plan and what not. Hopefully, if you're an examiner or a trainer at your home resort, you have a way to present this information a little bit about where to pivot, how to plan for pivoting to newer staff, right? And again, that tool is just my brain, right? So take it for what it's will, modify it, use it. I dropped the spreadsheet into the chat. I can do it again. Lateral learning from Patrick. Yes. So lateral learning is a really good point. I think it's a term we don't use often enough. Take the application of the skill, studied, explored into many different diverse environments, right? One skill, just keep using it in different places, or maybe play with the dirt of the skill. Duration, intensity, rate, and timing.
Hey Pete, in relative to the planning and the exploration, right? The Tom, I think it was, talked about fear, in a lot of our students. Can you talk a little bit about how you would plan or to address the fear factor? Because that's often a huge issue with our lessons.
I'm with you. So I'm gonna do a plug for the freestyle manual, by the way, the PSIA-AASI freestyle manual, because there's a good section in there on fear. Right, fear is such a real part of freestyle. It's really easy to break yourself. I have. I'm sure almost anyone that's been off a jump has also hurt themselves. And so, like, go check it out. Look at the fear model. But what I will say is that there's a few different ways to explore without scaring people, because is that kind of the question that you're asking, Rich, right? How do you push them a little bit, but also lower fear?
Yeah, because sometimes they're frozen by the fear in many cases,
Yep. So I think a couple ways to tackle this, right, is come back to the idea of lateral learning, right? You can explore things by moving, by changing the environment a little bit, or changing or modifying one part of it, but like sticking with the initial movement so that you're not increasing the risk or increasing the fear. And I'd say, like, the other piece of the puzzle is, like, you don't have to. They may not learn anything, and that's okay. They may walk away skiing the same terrain. They may actually come to a lesson where they ski lower level terrain than they did last time. And we can't let our goal of pushing them supersede their need for a good experience. So, like, an example I'll give you is that I had this lesson last year with a guy that had 7 fused vertebrae. He used to be a pretty good skier, and he didn't know. He showed up that day not even knowing if he could skate anymore. But at one point he was skiing black diamonds and he was pretty comfortable. So, like, for us, it was just like tiny little jumps, tiny little explorations, and we started about as, we didn't go back to boot drills, but we went pretty darn close to starting over. And for him, it was just all about, like, confirmation. I can do this. And for him, once he got going, it was actually way easier to ski on a blue in a parallel turn. But I had to get back to that point, right? Because his strength and his flexibility was all off, right? So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think it's a good one. And I'm going to see if I can pull up.
Can I hop in for a sec?
Sure.
So with fear, a lot of people think, well, we're managing, like, not just physical risk, but emotional. So a lot of times people are just, oh, I overtrained someone, but there's other ways to intimidate people by over information. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. And then they're feeling insecure. So managing information, activities to, like, terrain selection and pacing is one of our fundamentals. There's so many different ways, like, we can make someone feel emotionally, like, nervous or insecure without even realizing it. So managing, I think, information is a big one too.
That's a really good point. I know my journey, when I first started, I tried to present a lot of information and talked a lot. And over the last few years, I'm talking less and then, letting them discover things more. So I think that's a good point.
Brandon asked, is there a way to leverage this tool to complement your assessment prep? Are you talking about Pete's spreadsheet?
Yes, exactly. like thinking through what kinds of things will enhance certain skills and develop certain skills so that you are really aware of what you can present in different scenarios with different kinds of students.
I think I would challenge you to try and take, so there is part one of that spreadsheet, right? Just fill it out, right? Cool. Next time you fill it out, start over, and I want you to take any activity and try and put it in every column. But you can't put it in the column until you can figure out how to modify that activity for that fundamental. Because you should be able to take one activity and modify it for all 5 fundamentals, and then you're ready to pivot in any direction.
Wow.
That would be that's like the level 3 version. Because that's how you find common ground in a short amount of time, is you find a unifying activity, but you create small modifications for everybody. Right?
No, I was just gonna say to farther elaborate on Brandon's point was, yeah, I like to have basically figure out how many different ways can I use a task, right? How many different ways can I tweak it? How much use can I get out of this, right? So no matter what situations I come into, I've got a bunch of really flexible tasks that I can use potentially in multiple scenarios, or tweak it as we go, right? As students' needs change. Like an example of this is stork turns, for example. Pete had that on his list under, more controlling the relationship of the center of mass relative to base support, right? Outside ski pressure. And I think that's what we tend to usually think about it. But one thing is, it's actually become probably one of my favorite regulating the magnitude of pressure tasks, by just adding a focus on how the inside ski is picked up and set down, right? Are you picking the ski up and bringing it closer to you? Or is it being picked up through extension of the other leg and sat back down through flexion of the outside leg? And it's, just finding little angles like that where you can really milk the most out of a task and take it in different directions depending on the students you have in front of you.
The other thing I would say is that with that activity, right, and the outcome that you want, think about, can you use that activity to achieve that outcome? Number one, obviously we're trying to do that. Or match the outcome with the activity. Secondly, can you use that activity to make them better at that outcome? Or can you use that activity to make them worse? And I'm not saying you want to make people worse all the time, but sometimes people have no idea that they can't do something. So if you can take that activity and you just keep cranking the dial until it gets hard enough that a failure point occurs, all of a sudden you've got an incredible amount of buy-in. But if you do that in an exam environment, you got about 15 minutes to turn it back around and make something, help them be successful, at least see how they could, and not demoralize them. Right? So there, it's a fine line.
Put it in your pocket, have it every day. You get stumped in a lesson, look at your sheet, go, oh man, I should have done that. Bring it with you.
Well, here's what I'll say. We can't solve it all. It's really nice to see everybody. Thank you for those who shared. Thank you, Brandon.
Yes, and thank you everyone for coming out.
Good session. Thank you.